an introduction. We'll give each person an introduction to start with. If we start with myself, I'm the author of the sustainable fashion and lifestyle blog Curiously Conscious, and I'm the founder of Ethical Influencers, which is a free membership platform with over 700 members worldwide. I'm definitely more of a generalist, and that's why I'll be asking the questions, but I'd love to kind of hand things over to Ella to give an introduction and to explain why the story of plastic is so important.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Ella. I'm an environmental activist and campaigner. I'm working to tackle period plastic with manufacturers and supermarkets. And I think for the story of plastic, I was really up and enthusiastic for hosting in a virtual screening because it's so impactful and it shows really what everything that is going on. We see the whole picture and we don't just see what is in the headlines and on the tabloid.
Absolutely. And Imogen?
Hi everyone, my name's Imogen Napper and I'm a research fellow at the University of Plymouth. My whole research looks at the sources and fate of plastic getting into the marine environment. So we worked on microbeads and facial scrubs and washing our clothes, and more recently looking at solutions that try and capture the fibres in the washing cycle. My current job is working with National Geographic on the Sea to Source trip, where we've been going along the Ganges River pre-monsoon and post-monsoon to get a 3D picture of plastics in a major river system, and currently going crazy in the lab, analysing all of the data and getting some really interesting results.
Amazing work. I'm going to give a brief introduction to Tori so that when she joins, there's no real disruption. So Tori is an intersectional climate activist and a mental health advocate, and she's also the co-host of the Bad Activist podcast. She does some incredible work as well. So it's great to have all of you alongside us tonight. I'd like to kind of start with just a general question. I'm always intrigued as to know where people's origin story is and what was the spark that started your journey into the world of sustainability and environmental activism. For anyone to take, Imogen, Ella, go for it.
Go for it.
I was a bit of a slow burner getting into research, I'd say. I was really lucky that I grew up in a small seaside town called Clevedon, which is near Bristol. And when I was younger, I was very lucky that we were surrounded by so many wonderful beaches looking over Wales. So Clevedon's near Bristol. And I never remember there being any plastic on the beach at all. I used to always draw in the sand, and if there was plastic, I'd have used it as a paintbrush because I used to take pebbles and shells. But now I go back to the same beaches and they're just covered in plastic, and it really looks like confetti all over the sand, depending on what beach you go to. And it concerns me that potentially in another 10 years, what's it going to be like if it's already bad now? So getting into research for me was I was being able to be part of that solution and use research to make effective change, whether that's with consumers or legislation or industry, and pushing research out as a force for good. So that's how I got to where I am.
Amazing stuff. Ella?
So for me, it was a bit of an odd one, really. Prior to starting my campaign, I was working a regular day job as a postal worker for Royal Mail. But while I was out delivering the post, I noticed the amount of waste being disposed of each week increasing. And that was really the first light bulb moment that made me think differently. It was just a few streets where I was delivering, but it made me think about our consumption on a national scale and how much we throw away. And this then actually made me think about what I use myself. So I started to make product switches and I was feeling really positive about that. But then my period started and I never really considered what we use and how much disposable plastic waste is in that. So I did some online research and they can contain up to 90% plastic. You know, they're used for just 4 to 8 hours, disposed of, and then take over 500 years to break down. That's over 7 times the average lifetime of the person using them. And that is what shocked me the most. The fact that they're just used for a few hours and then they take centuries to break down. So I spoke to my family and friends about this, and even work colleagues, to their dismay, to find out if they knew about it, but they were equally surprised by what I was talking to them about. So I went into my local supermarket to get an alternative. However, I looked up and down the shelves and there was no choice. It was either plastic or plastic. And that really bugged me, because if that choice isn't available on the shelves, how can we truly make a decision about what we buy? We can't. It's literally what is in front of us. So I had to go online to switch to eco-friendly products. And that was it. I thought someone else would probably do something about it. I carried on with my job. But then I kept thinking about it. And if you're a postal worker or do something like that, you're out every day and you think about it all the time. And it just kept niggling away at me. I couldn't get it out of my head. It just didn't make sense to me that if small companies can make them without plastic, then so can big brands too. And they can't, there's no excuse not to, especially with all the profits that they overturn each year. So I started the campaign, and I never thought that it would be what it is today. It went viral very quickly. It's now over 215,000 signatures, and it is leading to significant change in the period industry. So I'm regularly meeting with decision makers and like manufacturers and supermarkets to show them how they can make change happen, because it is their responsibility. However, it wasn't so easy in the first year, but my persistence and the campaign's continued momentum and all of the support from the wonderful people that have signed the campaign led the decision makers to take note and invite me to speak to them. So I've been doing that for over 2 years now. It's the best thing that I've ever done. I could never ever have imagined I would be doing something like this, or that I as an individual could really make a difference. And I think especially as young women, we don't think that at a young age. I always thought that scientists and people with degrees and things would make change, and they do, but we all can. So the campaign has led to 3 retailers ditching their plastic tampon applicators, which is saving over 17 tonnes of plastic each year. And it's also leading many to stock alternative products and launch their own. Of course, I want them also to remove plastic from all of their products, because just bringing out an alternative option isn't the answer. We do need to see that real change happening with all of their products. And I'm also doing a lot of work with Welsh Government and councils to get them to spend their period poverty funding on eco-friendly products. And 4 councils have now made the move to committing to that. And Welsh Government have recently stipulated that all councils in Wales must spend at least 50% of their funding on eco-friendly products. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing work.
Periods every day of the year.
You're both doing incredible things. It's actually great to hear the backstory for both of you, in that it is so observational, the first thing that you both thought of and then went, right, how can we make the change? The thing with the story of plastic that stood out for me was linking up all of the different elements and different parts of the journey that plastic has and how it's affecting the environment and different people. And what you've both done is seem to kind of sew that together and make real change happen in your work so very differently, but so effectively as well. So great to kind of see it all coming together. Now, I hope everybody has already watched The Story of Plastic on the link that was sent out when they signed up for this event. I watched it earlier this week, and I'm going to be asking a couple of questions now more about the story of plastic, and then going a bit deeper into each of your works. For question and answer, we're going to do that at the end. So if you do have questions, there's people already using the chat box, pop it in there and we'll recap over those at the end. So to start with, I guess, will be the question of, what parts of the film really stood out to you both, and why? You know, was there anything that was a surprise, or do you know it all?
I think that the film was really good at putting it visually, and when you see it to that extent, it it just is upsetting, isn't it? That's our planet, that's how much we're damaging it. We're literally treating some bits of the environment like a big trash pile, and it doesn't mean that the people that are doing it are necessarily doing it for the wrong reasons. It's maybe that they haven't had the right solutions. And speaking about India and Bangladesh, a lot of villages out there, the government might provide bins, but then they won't provide how the bins are actually going to be taken away. So their only real option is to put it in a river or to burn it. So I think the film is really good at breaking down, actually, it's not on the consumer, it is with industry, it is with governments, and we all have to work together so that it's going to have the most effective output. The image that stays in my head the most, because I've seen it and I didn't believe it, was the Delhi trash pile. And I remember I was driving to the airport after the end of our expedition. I said to my friends in the bus with me, I didn't realise that Delhi had a mountain. And one of my Indian colleagues said, that's not a mountain, that's our rubbish pile. And to see it, and there were all these birds flying around, and just knowing that it's rubbish, I was like, oh my goodness, it takes your breath away. And to literally see a pile of waste and rubbish from the way that we live our lives, because when we make products, we haven't thought effectively of that whole circular economy of what's going to happen to it. So I think that the film was really good at breaking down some crucial points that need to be discussed.
Absolutely. Ella, how about you?
For me, touching on what Imogen said, I think I was most surprised about how everything is impacting people so much in those countries, and the images of people living in our plastic waste. That, I think, that is what really broke my heart, really. You know, we hear a lot in the West about how Asia is the problem, about how they are the ones doing this. However, we are the ones sending our waste there. We know that they can't deal with it. And with this film, I felt it really did tie that into it. And I was really pleased that it did. You know, it tied in those companies that are pushing plastic on people that cannot deal with it. There's no infrastructure there to deal with it. And also highlighting that we are sending our waste there as well. So that really is what stuck with me, is how there is environmental racism with plastic pollution. And I think since everything with the Black Lives Matter, that's been playing a lot in my head recently after seeing the film again. And I can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that was a real shocker for me as well, and seeing the disparity between how the global north is producing so much of this, and then it's kind of being dumped in the global south without any infrastructure, without any thought for people and planet. The other part for me as well that really stuck with me was how campaigns such as Keep America Beautiful, and in my head I was thinking, well, you've also got Keep Britain Tidy. We kind of start linking littering as pollution, and littering is so individualistic in, okay, somebody's throwing a crisp wrapper at the park, it's a consumer's problem, and there's so much kind of pushing that, you know, there's so much funding that's going into that by these big businesses, hiding behind the idea that it's not their responsibility, they're trying to give that to somebody else. So yeah, that was a real shocker to me. I'm going to kind of move on to probably a slightly more tricky question. Do you think now, having seen the film, I mean, and also within your work, do you think that the impact of plastic is the responsibility of manufacturers? Is it the responsibility of consumers? Is it a mix of both? How do you see it?
I think it's a mix of both. When I first started my PhD, I thought plastic was evil. I was just like, it's plastic, it's the problem. But actually, it's an amazing, incredible material that has so many wide uses, and it's so good at what it does. It's so durable, it's so functional, it's cheap. We make so much of it. And like Ella's been saying, the problem is that it's in so many single-use applications. So we're making a material, a product that will last forever, but then using it for a matter of, I don't know, in some cases, minutes. Think of like a plastic carrier bag, which baffles me. And my first research piece was looking at microbeads and facial scrubs, and we found that in one bottle there could be 3 million, just in that one bottle. So in a squirt on your hand, there could be over 10,000. So every time you would wash your face with a squirt in your hand, 10,000 tiny microplastic bits would go down the drain, potentially through the sewage treatment works and then into our oceans. And it was terrifying, but the results were exciting. So again, it showed me how research can be really effective and make that change, which I was hoping for. So the first thing that happened is that the consumers, you and me, got really angry and agitated that we didn't know that there was plastic in our facial scrubs. And put my hand up, I actually used to use some of these products and I never even considered that the hard bits in it would be plastic. It just never even crossed my mind. So when I found out about it, I was like, that's crazy. Why aren't we using something natural instead, like sugar or salt, or you can use different types of nuts as well. So the consumers started to be very vocal, and with the power of social media, started to boycott the products. And it was really simple because you could just go to a shop, you could look on the back of an ingredients list. If it said polyethylene or polypropylene, you didn't have to buy it. So that was, in that moment, you're an ocean hero. You're potentially stopping 3 million tiny microplastic bits from getting into the environment. So then, because there was such a stir about it, and there was a bit of media and people were discussing it, and you could go to the shops and decide that 3 million microplastic bits weren't going in the ocean by just that one split-second decision of what facial scrub you're going to buy. So it gave people that power and that excitement that they can make a big change. Then industry started to listen, and they were like, okay, we can see it's not being very popular here. How can we work together and probably make a little bit of money on the side as well that will please the people that are trying to buy these products? So a lot of companies voluntarily removed microbeads from their products, saying that they were microbead free, which they were using as their marketing, and then also just removing plastics. So it's a win-win. I scratch your back, you scratch mine situation. And then there was the legislation from government. So legislation got passed that microbeads in facial scrubs, these tiny plastic bits, completely not necessary, not needed, and made illegal, which was great. The fastest one was the consumer. We're just so quick, aren't we? Especially on Twitter and speaking and spreading like wildfire. Industry was a little bit slower, and government, I guess just the nature of the beast, they were the slowest, and we were one of the slowest countries actually. But it definitely taught me how it's that triangle of consumer, industry, and also legislation working together to make really effective change. Some might be faster than others, but if we can nail that triangle, really similar to what Ella's been doing with her amazing campaign, which again uses that whole triangle, we just have to keep taking that forward almost for every single plastic item, to then think about the circular economy. Is it needed? And can we actually use an alternative instead?
Amazing. I mean, I'm in awe of both of your works, and I think that triangle is absolutely necessary. I'd love to actually have seen a bit more about legislation within the story of plastic. I think they touched on it briefly, but could have been a bit more. Ella, how about you? Do you think it sits with manufacturers? Do you think it sits with consumers?
I think that it sits with both, just like what Imogen said, really. I think we need the consumer to be wanting these products and these changes, because if consumers don't want that, manufacturers won't make it. Similarly, there needs to be a hell of a lot more transparency from these brands. They need to bring people into their minds and think about how they can make being sustainable better and easier for the consumer. Because at the moment, it isn't easy. Just like how we've got different recycling systems in the UK for each different council. I mean, it's mad. It's a recipe for disaster, and it's just set to fail. I know we can't recycle ourselves out of this problem, and we need to be reducing plastic as much as possible, but we do need it to be made easier so that we can recycle effectively. One of the things that I've always been confused about is something as simple as the green dot logo, which is a little arrow, little green arrow symbol on packaging, and it looks like a recycling symbol. Now, forever, I've thought that meant it could be recycled. So I've been putting like biscuit packets in recycling for a very long time, not recently, not within the last 2 years, but before that, I was doing it all the time because I thought, it's recyclable, I can recycle it. But of course, that's not the case. It just means that those brands have put a bit of money into doing something. I mean, I don't even know all the ins and outs of what that logo means, but that's not transparent. That's confusing the consumer. We need collective action to make real change happen. We need consumers to be spending differently, as well as knocking on the doors of these brands, asking them and calling on them and demanding change so that they know that that is what they want. Because at the same time, if a brand or a manufacturer doesn't know that this is what people want, they won't start to do it. You know, I've been in those meetings, I've had these conversations. They're all very different in how they approach these things. But for me, I think most of the responsibility lies at the top, because we need to stop this problem at source. These companies and manufacturers have got a responsibility, and we need to hold them to account. They know what they're doing. Some of them say plastic is what we want, but we need to keep hammering it back that that's not what we want. We need to make a lot of noise. We need to start conversations, because conversations lead to wider change. They lead to more and more awareness being raised, and that leads to action. And action can only be a good thing. And we've seen that a lot recently, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's protesting for something like stopping the tampon tax or getting period products made available at schools for those that need them. When we raise our voices, change happens. If we don't, it will never happen.
Absolutely. I'm going to go back slightly to the point about the green dot, and I was wondering whether you think that the plastic free mark will have any effect, because I'm starting to see that appearing on packaging when it is completely plastic free.
Yeah, it is. I think there can be a lot of confusion in sustainability, and since I've started this campaign, I've noticed it a lot more. You know, I started it thinking, oh, I'll make period products plastic free, that'll be the end of it. But really, there's so much more to it. You know, there's bioplastic, there's plastic that can be composted, there's plastic that can biodegrade, there's plant-based plastic. There's all these different buzzwords for it. And I think that can harm what we're trying to do. Because even if there is a logo that is, for example, the Vegan Society logo, you could have that on a product, which means that they have okayed that product as being vegan. However, you then get brands that might say vegan friendly, just in writing, not with the Vegan Society logo, but then that makes you think that the product is vegan. Now, the product ingredients might be vegan, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's cruelty free. So there's so many things in all of this that just make it confusing, and that's why we need action from the top. We need it to be made easier. We need one logo for one thing that means this. We need something that means this. It needs to be simplified. And at the moment, it's not. You know, we've got all these different words and numbers for what is recyclable, what isn't, what's mixed material. You know, I was walking down the street the other day, someone had polystyrene in their recycling bin. Who knows? You know, we need to make these things a lot easier for people to understand.
Completely. And yeah, polystyrene is not recyclable.
No.
I want to come on to you, Imogen. As you mentioned, your work has led to the banning of microbeads, which was incredible work. And now you're working on the detection. Well, you've actually detected that when it comes to our clothes being put in a wash, over 700,000 fibres can come off them in just one wash, with the majority of that being plastic. And I want to know whether you think plastic-based fabrics may be banned one day as well. Do you think that's going to be a possibility?
It's a difficult one, because often plastic-free clothing is really expensive, and then you're segregating members of society that can't afford to have those certain clothes. And then there's also ethics between natural products as well. So cotton uses a lot of water. So then in these areas, often lower income areas that are having all of these cotton farms, then it's depleting all of the water that they need for their own health. So the thing that I'm really passionate about is only buying things once and then wearing it for life, or till it's literally just, you know, tiny threads, it's fallen to bits. But we've turned into such a fast fashion industry where, and guilty as charged, I probably did it when I was at uni. You're going to go out, or you're going to an event, so then you go shopping and you just buy that one outfit and then you wear it to that event, but then you never wear it again. And then you either just get rid of it or put it into a charity shop, or it just sits in your wardrobe for years. So it's all about being aware of what you're doing. If you can shop in charity shops more rather than going to main brand shops, amazing. There's so many different tangents of what you can do to stop these fibres potentially entering the marine environment. So you can buy natural if that's an option to you, but make sure that you're buying it from a good brand that's also using a natural alternative that is environmentally sustainable. You can just wash your clothes less. I think as worldwide, especially in the UK, we probably wash our clothes a little bit too much. You might wear a t-shirt once and then put it into the washing basket, but you don't need to, only wash it if it's dirty. You could look at some of the filters and washing machines and read our paper that came out two weeks ago. And then there's a push on industry of whether we can try and get these filters into washing machines to capture the fibres. And there's a small behaviour change because we capture the fibres in the tumble dryer. You know, we remove that fluff and we put it into the bin. So we could just do exactly the same for a washing machine. It's really just taught me, one, I do a lot of washing clothes and seeing how many plastic fibres come off. And I thought it would be one easy fix, but there's so many different tangents to it that it's just not a one size fits all. There's got to be lots of different solutions, even for one problem. Even looking at how clothes are made differently and woven so that they shed less in the first place. Well, back to your question, do I think we'll ever go completely to natural clothes? In all honesty, in my personal opinion, no. I think plastic is here to stay, especially in our lifetime. And that's not a bad thing. Like I said, it's a great material. I've got a jumper that I've had that's made out of polyester that's lasted me since I was 18 and I'm 28. I just keep sewing up bits that got holes in for my dog chewing it when he was a puppy. So no, but I understand why a lot of people think it would be good to go to natural, but we need to think of all of the other solutions that go with it too.
I think absolutely right. Somebody asked, and I was actually going to come on to the point about the microfiber filters in washing machines. They asked whether, I've read that if you wash something brand new and it's polyester, it releases more fibers at the start of its life and then releases less as it goes on. Is this the case? And, you know, with filters, do you think anything more is going to come in that space? Because it seems a little kind of unverified at this stage.
So the initial research that we did find that for the first 5 washes, there was an initial spike of fibres coming off, but then it plateaued and it was steady for about 10 washes afterwards. So I haven't done more than that. But it'll be interesting to see if it's steady for a while and then it goes high again, or maybe even goes lower. So there's still lots of research that we can do with that. Lots of filters work by, they collect the fibres, but then the fibres almost act as a filter itself, stopping other fibres getting through. And learning about all of these different solutions and what different products have been invented, thinking on the washing machine filter kind of level, is really exciting because everyone's got all of these different ideas that all have one common aim, but it could have a centrifugal force that pushes out the water so the fibres stay. It could be a mesh, really fine mesh, so the water just passes through and the fibres get caught. There's other things that we tested, like that was designed, the Cora ball, which is kind of like a cactus ball that aims to try and capture the fibres on the hooks. But like Ellis said in her last question, we just need to make sure that things that are being designed and being sold, even though they've all got that common purpose, is not that it's tricking the consumer, but it's completely black and white and concise and clear for the consumer and tested independently. Otherwise, you could have companies, like the vegan statement that was just said, you could have companies that say we're completely environmental, we're plastic free, we are the best on the market, which of course you'd want to say because you want to say that you're best and get the most money, but you have to make sure that it has got that environmental solution and it is effective, because if it's not, then it's kind of like greenwashing, to use that term.
Yeah, I mean, quite
That's
literally.
happening a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot, because people are aware that as worldwide we're trying to be more environmental. We're so clocked on to trying to protect our environment now, because we can literally see how it's damaging the areas around us. I only have to walk to work, which is about a 20-minute walk, and you always see litter on the floor. It doesn't even surprise you anymore. You just see litter on the floor. Then you go to the beach and then the sand is just covered in plastic. It's become the norm to us because we see it so much, which is scary, because that's not the norm, finding litter all over our wonderful planet. So that's exactly why we're at an amazing point where we can make some really effective change, but we need to make sure that that change is being verified and it is making a change. It's not actually making something worse or not having any effect.
Absolutely. Just quickly on that, yes, no question. When you do find the fibers, if you use a filter in your wash, do they go straight in the bin, straight to landfill?
Unfortunately, yeah, they go straight in the bin. It sounds like a negative, but actually it's a positive, because at least they're not in our wonderful environment, they're not in the ocean, they're in a controlled, confined space, even though we just bury our rubbish underground or burn it, which it seems bizarre. They're where they're meant to be, until we can find an alternative or a way that we can make clothes shed less. But it is just the bin.
Completely. Unfortunately, I've had a message from Tori saying that she's unable to join us. I know we're halfway through, so we're going to continue as we're going on. We've had some great questions coming up, so I'm making a note as we get towards the Q&A. I wanted to ask Ella a question, and then we'll move straight on to Q&A. Considering you go head to head with a lot of period product manufacturers, do you find it's actually quite a difficult process to convince them to move away from manufacturing unnecessary plastic applicators? How does it work?
Yeah, so the plastic applicators is a really interesting one. So obviously the campaign is tackling the whole array of products, like pads, tampons, packaging, wrappers. But plastic applicators are the first step that manufacturers can take towards going plastic free. So I've had a very mixed reaction and response from this with these manufacturers and brands, unfortunately. So Sainsbury's, Aldi, and Superdrug were all very on board with doing this and recognised that they are an unnecessary use of plastic. So they stopped the production of them, which is fantastic. And I think this is hopefully going to lead to more taking that step. But there are some who are at the top that produce a lot of them, like Tampax. And when I contact them about this, which I do a lot, they say that plastic is what women want. Now, that's kind of like the Coke line that we've heard recently, that plastic is what people want. It drives me bonkers, because evidently it's not what everyone wants. And they produce so many different types of plastic applicators. There are currently 3 different types in the UK. And it really, I see them all over the place. Sometimes I see them in the street. Sometimes I see them on the beach. I've been to sewage treatment works. So I've seen them coming through because so many people wrongly flush them down toilets. And because they're so buoyant, they end up on our beaches. So it is a real rainbow of pollution. And it is something that is so easy for them to stop doing. So I'm going to be doing more campaign action to put further pressure on those that continue to pump out unnecessary plastic with no consideration of the environmental impact. Because of lockdown and everything that's happened, unfortunately, it's not been able to happen yet. So it will happen as soon as it is able to. But yeah, it's very mixed. There are some that deflect, and despite my research that I take to them, they don't want to hear. but that's not going to stop me from pushing harder, and that's not going to stop all the people that have signed the campaign from continuing to push. And there's so many people that haven't signed it that just know it's the right thing to do, and I'm going to be pushing for them to be added to the single-use plastic ban as well, because they're used for seconds, yet they take centuries to break down. Period products are the 5th most common item found on Europe's beaches. In comparison, straws are the 7th. So period products are found more often than straws. Nobody talks about it, which is why it's so important that this change happens at source. And I'm not going to go away.
I'm glad you're not. I actually think that's an interesting point, because within the story of plastic, they mention how straws, a lot of the time there is an alternative, or it's easier to give that up. But there is, as somebody mentioned in the chat earlier as well, you know, you have cardboard applicators, you have applicator-less tampons. I'm surprised to hear that this is not being made more.
Open. And you even have reusable tampons now as well, reusable tampon applicators. So if somebody does want to have a plastic feel tampon applicator, then they can switch to that. Another problem that we're getting as well is that there are a lot of brands switching to plant-based plastic applicators. And this is, again, going back to Imogen, it's greenwashing. They react just the same way in the marine environment. They're no better, yet they're marketed as the guilt-free, planet-friendly option. I mean, that says it all, really. They're not. There is some plant-based plastic that has to be used in period products for them to be eco-friendly. For example, with disposable pads, you've got the backing of them. That's got to be a plant-based plastic, and the sticky bit and the wrappers that they come in. But the plastic applicators, they don't need to exist. There's no reason for them to. So they really don't need, there doesn't need to be a plant-based option out there for them. It's just greenwashing. And there are a lot of people that get in touch with me and say, I'm using this, it's fine. And it's like, sorry, kind of not. And please don't flush them. That's what a lot of people do, because they think they're planet friendly, it's okay to flush them, but they're not. And also sometimes people say, you know, I've switched to a cardboard applicator, which is an own brand supermarket product, and they're like, that's plastic free. Still, they're not plastic free. A lot of tampons, most of them come with something called a veil, which is made of polyester, and it holds all of fibers in, but it doesn't have to be made out of polyester.
I think that was what I was most shocked at when I found about most conventional period products contain plastic, and it's not just the applicators, it's the actual product themselves. It just seems odd. And at the time we were talking about BPA in plastic water bottles and how that was bad and leaching into our water, and I'm thinking, people are wearing plastic against their skin for up to 8 hours at a time. It just seems I don't know the science behind that side of things. Maybe Imogen can tell us more, but yeah, I'm going to move on to Q&A. I think we've covered quite a few of the questions that have been asked already, but I have a long one to start with from Laura, and she asked early on, do you think the problem of plastic pollution is now beyond repair? What are your views?
I think, unfortunately, the damage that we've done to a lot of the environments is going to be really hard to remove. You know, there's tiny fibers, tiny microbeads, microplastics all in the ocean. How do you remove something that's that small and is so widespread? So yes, that sucks, but what we can do now is we know that it's bad. We know that we've made a bit of a rubbish tip of our environment, and rather than dwell and think, okay, we need to clean this up, my supervisor Richard uses a really good analogy where often it's like an overfilling bath, and rather than what we're doing at the moment is just mopping up the floor, but the bath keeps overfilling, and what we need to do is just turn off the tap. We need to turn off the tap by what Ella's doing, you know, making non-plastic applicators, and you know, just making that discussion with industry, and that's how we're going to go forward, is by turning off the tap and knowing how we can make the solutions, not necessarily looking at how we can clean it up. There's a lot in there, way more than we can probably even just think about. It's just look at our beaches to understand how polluted it is, but there's loads of bits that we just can't even see. So how do you try and effectively remove something that you can't see? But it's not all doom and gloom, because we're at a very exciting point in time that we're all here, so we clearly all care about the environment. And probably 5-10 years ago there weren't many discussions like this, so it shows how quickly we're moving on to try and make positive change.
Completely. I mean, after watching Story of Plastic earlier this week, I remembered I'd written a piece for, it's awful, it's in Huffington Post in 2018, saying, okay, the plastic crisis is here, here's 10 tips to do at home. And I thought, I didn't cover anything about legislation, I didn't cover anything about manufacturers. Now with pieces like The Story of Plastic and the work that you're both doing, it's very clear that there is this triangle, and we all need to connect the dots and campaign across these rather than just buy better. I'm going to move into slightly more specific question to you, Ella. Tash M asked, what is being done, if anything, at schools to educate young girls about these alternatives, and should they be included in sex education?
Yeah, so I don't know about you, but when I had period education at school, there wasn't really a lot that happened. I was given branded products from Tampax Norway, told to use these, and that was pretty much it. So that then starts a consumer cycle from a young age, and that's what these big brands like to do. So for me, they definitely need to be included in period education. I think there needs to be a total rehaul of the education that we're giving young people who menstruate at schools. There needs to be reusable products in there. There needs to be eco-friendly products in there. There needs to be, don't flush these products in there, because I used to flush tampons at school. I don't anymore. But if we don't know, then we carry on doing what other people do. We need also to be aware of the wider environmental impacts of these products as well. And we just need to include everyone in that conversation. I mean, so many people have started different conversations with me throughout what I've been doing. And that's also why it's so important to have reusable product options in schools with the period poverty funding, because it's giving everyone access to a choice, because not every option is right for everybody. And I also never judge people for what they do use, because unfortunately at the moment eco-friendly options are more expensive. For me, that shouldn't be the case. It should be that the polluting ones are more expensive, and they should have a tax attached to them if they are even allowed on the shelves. But unfortunately, that's not the case, and they are more expensive than things like own brand products, but they are relatively priced the same to manufactured, like mainstream brands. So yeah, for me, there definitely needs to be more period education. I know that there are some groups doing things like this, like the Women's Environment Straw Network. They've been doing some things in England and English schools, but there does need to be a UK-wide consistent approach to it, because again, just like recycling, that inconsistency isn't helpful. We need a nationwide approach to it.
Absolutely. I have an interesting one from Susan Evans, and she'd asked, and I think this is for both of you really, if you either have any ideas on tackling the amount of plastic that's now being created and thrown away due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and also, I mean, this is a difficult one, what to do about multinational companies who are shamelessly profiting from all of this.
COVID one, there's a lot of new research that's showing that, yes, that there's going to be way more single-use gloves, masks that are unfortunately getting in our environment. It's kind of the nature of the beast. Plastic was there and people saw it as a safety protector, and yes, completely needed in COVID. Like, it was absolutely horrible and still continues to be a really nasty disease. And if people were staying safe by using plastic, that's exactly what it should be there for. Exactly that. It's revolutionized healthcare and hospitals, so I'm glad that it's being useful. But now we're through the majority of the storm. I'd like to think now we can get our rails back on the track and start talking about single-use plastic and how we can be more environmental. So I see a lot of people walking around with single-use masks. We don't really need a single-use mask. If you can afford to get your own mask, there's a funky designs, it's quite cool, there's a fashion of it now. But if not, then you can literally cut up a sock. You can cut up a sock and it makes a mask. So just find an old sock in your wardrobe. It's, like I said, the rails have kind of come off and now we need to put them back on. So COVID has had an impact. I think you can go shopping and all of the fresh produce instead of supermarkets is now wrapped in plastic for people touching it. But as long as you wash things and we're being careful, we just have to be extra careful now, that it is going to make an impact. But show us how far we had come before that point. We just need to get back on that track.
Completely. Ella, you got any comments on that?
Just reiterating what Imogen said, really, I think that with plastic, there is a time and a place for it. Healthcare is one of those. Unfortunately, there is a lot of single-use plastic in it, but it is, as Imogen said, protecting us and everyone around us. But there also needs to be movements made forward. For example, when the government knew that they were going to be making everyone wear masks and it being mandatory, maybe they should have rolled out reusable masks being sent to every household. There's got to be a plan in action, but of course, earlier on in the pandemic, it was more difficult because it was very new and it was a very big and dire situation. So of course, there's going to be an influx of plastic there. But like Imogen said, we know the impacts of it. You know, I see a lot of gloves and masks on the ground. It really frustrates me because even though we need to use them, we don't need to throw them on the floor and pollute the environment with them. They're there to protect us. We need to protect the planet by not throwing them on the floor. So, we need to do that properly. But going forward, we definitely can be more optimistic and think about the things that we can do to make further change happen.
Completely.
Definitely.
I've one kind of more personal anecdote. So my sister was working, she's an optometrist. She did COVID-19 testing. She volunteered and did that for the last number of months and has just returned back to her usual optometry job in Boots. And Boots have been sending out the reusable masks to all of their staff. So I think even in that sense, she was using disposables when testing and obviously a lot more rigorous PPE, but now she's using reusable when it is in the space of working as an optometrist. And kind of, if it works for her, I feel like I'm quite comfortable using a reusable mask or even an old sock, but hopefully a washed sock, a clean sock at that. Okay, I'm going to move on to, again, period products. Tash asked, will environmentally period products come down in price to make them more accessible and more attractive than their single-use counterparts? Ella, I imagine you can tell us about that.
Yeah, so unfortunately, as I touched on before, currently eco-friendly products are a little bit more expensive. So if you're thinking about tampons and pads, they tend to be similarly priced to their branded counterparts that contain plastic. So as with anything, when there's this demand for it, price will go down. So there were a lot of different brands from the campaign that have been reacting and launching their products. So from them launching their products, this is what people want, but we also need to make sure that we're buying them, because if we don't buy them, then they might take them away or it might get more expensive. But if we keep purchasing these different products, whether it's from one of those brands or from a smaller company, it will drive down price. And I think as well, with a lot of these retailers starting to make them, there are a lot of offers. So for example, there might be like 2 for £4, whereas usually they might be £3 each. So that helps to drive down price. And of course, also you can sometimes get loyalty points too. But I think, again, it's the supply and demand. So that will definitely help to make them
I think that brings us on to Chelsea had asked, are there any major health organisations such as the WHO pushing environmentally friendly feminine products? I mean, I'm guessing if you have these big bodies that are pushing that, that will also increase demand in itself as well.
Yeah, there seems to be like eco groups here and there that push them. I think with there being more and more period poverty funding, if we can get that to be spent on eco-friendly products, that will really help, because then those young people will choose to buy them as they get older and leave school. So as well with that is, with the money going behind these eco-friendly choices, that's again giving those companies and brands money, which will drive down the price too. So I think there needs to be a lot more put behind promoting truly eco-friendly period products, because again, we do see this area, there is a lot of greenwashing, unfortunately. So there does need to be a lot of clear pushing of the right ones.
Okay, Imogen, I'm going to come on to you. Melda asks, do we need to start framing plastic as a commercial issue versus a moral issue to get manufacturers to listen? And is there any research or evidence pointing to the commercial and bottom line impact of plastic alternatives?
Can you just repeat the first bit? So commercial
against moral issue.
Oh, that's a good question. It's both. I guess commercial can be driven by the moral input. The moral input is that I would argue anyone seeing plastic damaging a natural environment is upsetting. It's just displeasing to your eyes, because somewhere that you go, if I go to the beach and I want to just enjoy surfing or just sitting on the beach and I'm surrounded in plastic, it's a bit gross. So selfishly, I just want our beaches to be clean, but then morally it just doesn't feel right. So I'd hope that large organisations that are always run by people, they just need to dig deep and think about the environmental impact that a product or something can have. So I think it's always going to be going in tandem, but I think the moral component definitely needs to be used a lot more, rather than sometimes the money aspect, which sometimes I think priority, unfortunately. Yeah. In my opinion anyway. And what was the second part of the question?
The second part was, is there research or any evidence pointing to the commercial and bottom line impact of plastic alternatives?
Plastic alternatives, I'm sure there's some amazing research. It's really hard to keep up with research at the moment, because plastic is such a hot topic. When I started my PhD, it was a very small research area that we used to go to a conference, and I think there was, in the plastics conference, maybe 70 people, and now you go back to the same conference and there's over maybe 1,000. So there's papers literally coming out left, right and centre, and I'd love to read them all, but I need to sleep. There was a really interesting paper, I haven't read it yet, it's on my to-do list, that my supervisor was involved with. I think it got into Science, so quite a high impact paper, and it looks at all of the different ways that we can try and make our environment more plastic free. So they talk about how effective recycling will be over the next 50 years, how effective circular economy will be in the next 50 years, going to plastic free products in the next 50 years. And I believe, just from talking to people, that the paper concludes that we have everything that we need to dramatically reduce plastic going into our own environment. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have all of this information. Now it's just implementing it. So yes, there will be plastic there, single-use hospitals, of course, and using it for life. You know, my parents still have shopping bags from when I was in primary school that still work. So it's just bringing all of these points together.
I think on that note as well, Sarah had asked, do you think if countries like the US and Great Britain start to move towards a reduction of plastic, other countries will follow?
I hope so, and we really should be leading the way. We're very lucky. We are just incredibly lucky that we even have rubbish trucks to take our rubbish away and put them into a controlled space. And even though that might not seem lucky, other countries just don't have that luxury, so they have to do what they can, and a lot of that time to get rid of that rubbish and that waste, rather than it building up around their homes, is to put it into the river or to burn it. So rather than it being a competition, and I feel like it can be a competition of who's doing the best, it actually should be a lot of hand holding and saying, hey, we have a really good system here that seems to be working. Would you guys like to know how we've done it? Or can we help you get there? Or can we help your research capability? Can we help your waste management? So that we're all just singing from the same hymn sheet rather than making a monopoly competition.
I think
definitely. I feel like we need to be collaborating in all of this because it's going to benefit everyone. And a lot of the time, someone might come up with something and it's very exclusive. You know, it's only these countries that can see it for a certain amount of time, but that shouldn't be the case. Everyone should be brought into the conversation and made aware of these different things that can be changed. Also, a lot of these other countries, I know that we call them third world and all the rest of it, but they've been leading the way with reusing what they have and not using plastic. We've been using plastic so much here and marketing it to them. We saw that in the film. Whereas, for example, they were digging holes and getting rid of their waste in the riverbank, and they used to just be burying food waste and leaves and things like that. Now it's full of plastic because of all this marketed plastic to them. And oftentimes now there is no alternative for them other than plastic, and it's often cheaper too. So although we all need to be working together, we need governments to show leadership, we need brands to show leadership, and we need to hold them to account, but we also need to work together and collaborate. We really do. And things like Imogen's research is so important to raise that argument as well. It all goes hand in hand.
I think this would be something Tori would have chimed in on as well, in terms of looking at environmental racism and how it's quite colonial to go in and say, okay, right, we're going to just introduce a new product without actually recognizing these more traditional ways of disposing of products, and how different cultures in different countries would not have the same systems in place. The cynic in me says we don't want to collaborate, and great, we want to be, you know, innovative and have great statistics for the UK and the US, but maybe not share that, maybe not, you know, unless it's for profit, move it into other countries. I want to just quickly draw back to one of the statistics that was in the story of plastic, and before wrapping things up, where they said the cost to produce new fossil fuel based plastic is kept artificially low, with global fossil fuel subsidies making $5.2 trillion annually. This is a statistic from the International Monetary Fund from 2017. I don't know if things have changed since then, but this kind of subsidy that comes from our governments means that other alternatives are disincentivized. We're starting to kind of, you know, see that this support is really insidious, and it's a real issue. So whether or not the US and the UK can lead in changing things, I think we need to also be asking our governments why they're still doing that, and move away from it.
Yeah, also, you know, we've declared a climate emergency. Right. So going back to that, we should be listening to climate scientists and taking action on what we've declared, rather than just ignoring it and moving on blindly. Because at the moment, there is no real action from government with this. They listened to the pandemic, all the scientists behind that, and we need to do the same and listen to the climate scientists and act on that. And we really do need leadership from governments to enact change and get legislation and policies in place so that we really can take them seriously on what they're saying. Declaring one thing and then expanding airports and doing this, that, and the other really doesn't sit well with me.
Completely. Ella had a good point in the chat where she said also listening to Indigenous peoples alongside climate scientists, learning from tradition, learning from modern science, I think is a good collaboration to take. Okay, I'm going to bring things back to a slightly easier, light question to finish off on, and then we can do kind of sign-offs and where we can find you after this. We had an anonymous question, which was, what small steps can we individually take to reduce plastic and kind of a reliance on plastic when there might not be obvious alternatives in supermarkets?
Good question. There's so many little things that you can do without being aware of it, and It doesn't mean that you have to buy loads of new products to be plastic free. The best thing that you can do is just use what you have, so you don't have to buy anything new. Perfect. If it's plastic, it doesn't matter. It's doing the job. It can be as simple as washing your clothes less, so less fibres go into the environment, only washing it when you need to, just buying less and making sure that when you do buy a product that you think it could last for a long period of time, so buying from reasonable stores and just being aware of it. I think if you're always thinking in your head, someone said be an ocean hero in every moment, that what your actions will do could impact the environment, then it'll help you make those right choices. But I think there's a conception that you need to go out and get bamboo cutlery and go get bamboo cups and get rid of all of your plastic clothing. You can only wear natural now. And actually, the best thing you can do is not to do anything at all, not to buy anything at all. It's, you've got everything in your house that you need. So when something breaks, or if you need to get something new, then buy it. But don't feel guilty about it either. And realise that everyone's on their own plastic journey. So it's just fitting yourself into that journey and a place that's comfortable for you and comfortable with your lifestyle, so you don't feel guilty about it.
Wonderful stuff. Ella?
Definitely. I think it's about doing it at a rate that you're comfortable with, because when you start to make changes, it really is positive and it makes you hungry for more. So something that I've done during Plastic Free July is switching to loose leaf tea, because most tea bags contain plastic. Shock. It shocked me. So that's something that I've switched to. And a lot of the time you can actually buy in bulk online, which is a lot cheaper too. And something that I was made aware of by Besma is ethical banking and changing your bank to one that doesn't invest in fossil fuels. So I've recently switched banks for that too.
Thank you for that. I think just to quickly add on to that, there are so many other aspects of our life that may support plastic, but we don't think about the supporting plastic, banking being one, but also potentially trying to be more of an activist, whether it's raising your voice online, sharing the swaps that you're making with friends and family, and just educating and having conversation is really important. Also working out who your political representatives are, writing to them, at least being involved and understanding what they represent, and voting. Just vote. Go out and vote, be a part of that system. So yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Ella to sign us off. Brilliant chat.
Yeah. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to the amazing Besma and Imogen for taking the time to join. But I'd also like to say thank you to Mary, who's been moderating this evening, and for getting involved and helping to make it happen. And thank you to the Story of Plastic for allowing their film to be shown in this way. Like I touched on before, this really makes it accessible for people and brings everybody, no matter where they are, into the conversation. And that's really what we need. So if you'd like to, you can host your own virtual screening by going to their website at www.storyofplastic.org. And finally, thank you to everyone for joining us. And this conversation's been so positive, and there's a lot more that we can be doing, and the government can be doing, and I think that we're seeing that now. And I would encourage everyone to get involved and take action. And it's been a pleasure to host, and I hope that you have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.